Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Gartner Decoded. Today we'll be looking at trying to, summarize and provide a few of the sort of key themes and trends that we sort of took away from the recent Gartner Data and Analytics Summit. In particular, how you can sort of think to look at applying that to actually getting some real business value. I'm Kris Hunter, Manager Consulting Services at Ignite. I'm joined today by Nischay, one of our solution architects.
Thanks, Kris, for the intro. Before we jump in, why don't we give the audience a bit of an overview of why we're here today?
Yeah, good idea, Nischay. I guess specifically today, we're conscious that for those that didn't attend the summit like Gartner, and actually even for those that did, there's a lot of content over a 2-day summit. A lot of themes, a lot of things to sort of look at. And a lot of those themes resonated with the sort of value and visions that we have at Ignite. And there's also a lot of discussion out there in the industry, particularly around AI and generative AI and the hype that's sort of there with that at the moment. So in conjunction with a lot of the discussions we have with some of our customers and a lot of the questions we get, we thought it was a great opportunity to see if we can sort of summarize some of that content and actually provide some hopefully tangible takeaways for those that have joined us today. So let's get started. I guess to kick off, we thought we'd sort of summarize the overall sort of keynotes that came across. And in this space, there was sort of really 3 key areas, particularly in regards to AI, that was recommended to sort of focus on. The first one's about value creation. This is really making sure that there's that focus on business outcomes, not technical outcomes. Also making sure that you have got AI ready data. This is about the foundations, getting those foundations right, making sure you've got governance in there as one of those foundations as an enabler. There is a bit of a tendency and a lot of push to get involved in AI and rush in there, but this is sort of that caveat of making sure you've got your data ready for that before you sort of head on in. And ultimately, bringing this all back to people. That's a key aspect of this. This is about how do you create that collective intelligence and enable business, the users that are out there to get on and do what they need to do, make those independent decisions, because ultimately it's the people and the decisions that they're making that are going to leverage these tools, leverage AI, and ultimately lead to that value creation that's there. You'll see that we snippet through the content today, a lot of the Gartner predictions. Everyone loves a good Gartner prediction. And really the key one on this is sort of resonating on all of this, that sort of by 2028, there'll be a lot of businesses and enterprises that have invested in things like generative AI, built their own large language models. And really there's a prediction that a lot of that is going to be abandoned due to costs, complexity, and technical debt. Which is really bringing home the why these 3 things need to be put in place. So knowing that trend is coming, how can you get these 3 key areas sort of tackled so you can try and avoid being part of those stats. So what we'll do is we'll deep dive into each of those 3 areas and sort of talk through the key points within them. So when we talk about value, one of the key areas that was sort of discussed is making sure there's a focus on execution over long strategies. And really the key theme here is get going and learn, right? There will be mistakes that are made along the journey, and it's about how you get started in the right direction rather than trying to chase that perfect strategy. So here it's about sort of making sure you can identify potential value, understand the pathway of how you'd get to it, but make sure that that's sort of pragmatic and actionable. So again, avoiding that opportunity or that tendency to sort of chase the big strategy. A lot of organizations have been there over the years, spend a lot of time in a strategy, it gets put on a shelf, and it's not really helping you get to really the end goal. And that's really trying to make sure that there's that focus on continuous delivery, actually delivering outcomes and making sure we're doing so in a continuous way so that we're sort of actually incrementally adding value to the business. That's great in concept, but what do we actually do there? So I guess one of the ways we like to look at this from Ignite is really having a bit of a value-based prioritization framework so that you can start to work out for all those sort of initiatives you might be looking at, how do you actually put together a bit of a pathway or a plan to tackle that? I guess the way we look at this, there's sort of three key factors that we recommend sort of looking at. One, obviously, the potential business value. You'll hear us talk about things like hard cash, really the sorts of stuff that are really hitting the revenue line, as an example. Soft cash, things that are a little bit more indirect, efficiency gains, that sort of thing. And can even be things like reducing risk, all key elements of business value. Another key aspect is really the solution feasibility. So how hard will it actually be to implement or deliver? So looking at the technical and data readiness that you've got in the organization for that particular use case, and how can you actually sort of position that? Obviously, a key part of that as well is business readiness. So not losing sight of the people and process change impact in terms of putting in place an actual new use case and capability. And you'll see from the sort of visual there, that's sort of our sort of way of trying to, on a page, how do you articulate your initiatives? How do you see where they match on that grid, as a way of sort of allowing you to piece together where you should get started. So ideally, in a sort of tool like this, you'd be looking for the things that are in the top right quadrant, ideally, things that are simple to implement, but have a lot of business value. So it's just a really simple tool to be able to sort of look at your initiatives, understand those key parts, and then sort of how do you map them out and decide where to get started. That can be great in concept. Value is a hard thing to pin down, particularly in the data and AI space. And so you've got to think about where are the sorts of things that you'd measure there. An example in this space of something we've done a few years ago was we put in place a recommendation engine for balance in New Zealand. And really the goal of that was about speeding up and increasing the efficiencies of the nutrient specialists that were actually out in the field. At the time, that saved about 9% of their day-to-day task, their effort that they needed to do in that space. On the surface, that's a hard number to kind of work out. What does that mean from a value perspective? But the point behind that was that that allowed them to free up time to then spend that looking and working with customers who were actually at risk of churning. And the risk behind that was known to be about 3 million per annum. So straight away, we could sort of draw a comparison there of that model, that use case that was being chased, and where that actually gets linked to from a business outcome. So it's just how you look at the use case, the scenario, and how you tie that back to something that's important strategically to the organization. The other key parts that were sort of talked about in this space is at an executive level. So at a chief data and analytics officer level, there was a lot of discussion about this. And this is about making sure that you're business relevant. So this is, for those in this sort of role, you must be able to communicate the value of those use cases. You've got to make sure that they're enabling those business outcomes. But you've basically got to be able to do the storytelling. How do you link that to the business outcomes and what the business is strategically trying to do? And in particular, tackle that biggest constraint that is budgets. So how do you make that budget conversation an investment conversation and change the language? And again, you'll see one of those predictions there that 75% that have failed to make an organization-wide influence, their top priority will be assimilated back into the technology functions. And that's a key one for those working in this space, because over the years we've spent a lot of time in the data space trying to make sure that we are providing business visibility, business value, and really being business focused, so to then trying to avoid being sort of pushed back down into just being a part of the technology function. And overall, sort of wrapping all that up, as this is sort of coming through, it's about being outcome focused. And some of the little tips that sort of came through here were, it's often not just about the short-term return on investment of a particular use case, but how you actually align and link that through to strategic value. So can you link one of your initiatives or use cases through to something that's actually on the strategic business plan, for example, knowing that that's then driving part of something the organization is trying to achieve. Second to that is make sure you sort of understand all the elements that sort of come together here. So the risk, the cost, as well as the value, and then sort of what sort of tools can be put in place. And FinOps was sort of talked about here as a bit of a concept, but I might throw over to Nischay, who I know went to a few sessions in this space to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Kris. Before I get started on understanding the risk, cost, and values, I'm sure we've all heard the noise around AI will revolutionize the business, data is the new oil, and if you don't adapt, you will be left behind. Well, if you ask me, I'd say without a clear understanding of costs, values, and risk of your AI initiatives, it can quickly turn into costly experiments that fail to deliver. And it's not just about those risk, cost, and values that you do during the start of the initiative. It's that constant monitoring of your cost, values, and your risk assessment. As the world is constantly changing, so will your business, data, AI application, and resources. So in order to achieve this, Gartner sort of recommended a central FinOps practice, which should be established in your operating model to set and enforce standards. So you can proactively monitor and connect cost with value, and also introduce risk assessment and monitoring tools to sort of build ethical, responsible, and explainable AI systems that could meet contractual and commercial obligations. So moving on to sort of AI-ready data, what is it? Well, this is an interesting and quite challenging to answer. Well, it's not perfect governance, it's not perfect quality, and it's not perfect lineage. Although these things are important, but the main thing we should be looking at here is the appropriateness of your specific use case for the specific type of task you want to achieve. So the very first step is to align the data to a specific use case and the AI technique. So there's no such thing as AI-ready data for all use cases, and it's unrealistic because some techniques may require a large volume of data, whereas some can be done with a quick prototype. Second is the data management. When it comes to data management to support AI initiatives, we need to think beyond traditional data practices because they're too slow, too structured, and too rigid for AI teams. We need to know all formal and informal ways of managing data. So this includes data labeling techniques, synthetic data generation, where you're dealing with large volumes of data, AI enrichment, where you have use cases around unstructured data like PDFs, videos, etc. Again, it's more sort of about evolving the data management and alignment to the AI use cases. Another key area to sort of unlock the value is allow effective data sharing and active metadata management within the organization, so it can support various needs from different people within the unit or outside your business unit, while still continuously improving the quality and searchability of the data assets. So if you don't have that strategy in place, you could start with a data catalog and expand beyond those data assets, including your resources, infrastructures, etc. The last and probably the favorite area of every DNA leaders is the governance. To allow AI readiness and to sort of realize the value of these initiatives, governance needs to be an enabler, not just focused on compliance and the classic command and control approach. Instead, it should be focused towards the outcomes that are flexible as the organization evolves. So with supporting governance and evolving data management, it's also important to continuously qualify your data through different techniques like versioning, having those observability metrics so that we have enough consistent data, and to sort of support your new and existing AI workloads. Because when the data starts to have design and quality issues, that is a signal that the business is changing, which means there'll be changes to infrastructure, there'll be changes to your architecture, and that might require some other changes. So at Ignite, we acknowledge that this is an area of growing importance for our customers. And to support them through these changes, we've developed a lightweight tool designed to not only help them discover the data they need, but also ensure they have trust on that.
Yeah, and I guess on that point, Nischay, it's a great segue to the third and final sort of area, because our focus in this, particularly from a discoverability perspective, is about people. How do they know what's there, and how do they start to understand what's available? Is it ready to be used, etc.? So it leads well into the sort of final point that was sort of the key aspect here, and that's about people. The main area here is that there's going to be a need to be a big focus in regards to people and lifting that literacy. And it's not just the old-fashioned data literacy, which many have been sort of working on for a while, but this is about how you move that to AI literacy as well. And you'll see again from one of those predictions that the view here is that there'll need to be funding secured for this in future. It's going to become a key area and a key focus. And the unfortunate thing is that will probably happen because there will be a lot of failure along the way, and it will be recognized that it's the sort of literacy and the understanding of the people in the organization that will be key to that. So what do we do? One of the key focuses, as I've mentioned, is not just about data literacy. Whilst that's still important, obviously making sure people know what data is there, what's available, is it ready to be used, do I understand it? This is also about, do they understand AI? So do they understand the risks and the appropriate use of the tools and things that are starting to emerge and that might get built and deployed? As an example, how many in your own organizations do you really know whether there's people there that are out using ChatGPT, copying in sensitive documents to try and summarize or get something from it, not realizing what they're actually exposing out there with tools like that? So it's about making sure we lift that literacy and people understand what they're using and what's involved with it. Another aspect of this, as tools start to get deployed, is understanding the balance between accuracy and explainability. By that I mean, the more you focus on chasing the perfect, accurate model and AI technique, what that will often do is create more complexity and a little bit of that black box nature in the model itself. And when you're deploying these tools, a lot of the importance is around people understanding what it is that they're actually using, and that will drive adoption. So again, how we lift not just the literacy, but the actual use of these tools as we move forward starts to become that important balance between those sorts of things. The second point is about being willing to explore new operating models. This is fairly close to our heart at Ignite. So, we've got a view around the best results come when data enables people. And this is really resonating with that point. How do we make sure we've got the right operating models in place so that we're actually enabling people with the capability that's sort of being developed? And that's an important one to keep top of mind as organizations move forward. So this is coming to that collective intelligence point that Gartner sort of raised. And by that, they mean, how do you make sure that you've got the right capability, the right operating model that's whilst providing central control and governance, is really about how do you enable your business teams to get on with the job, to make the decisions that they need to make. And that's really where success is going to come from. And really, ultimately, that comes to how you empower employees. Leading to that point, and for those that work with us, you'll know that there's a lot of focus in sort of the platforms that we work through and sort of recommend with customers and the operate models that go with that to make sure that you're fostering that innovation and what we call exploration. So it's, have you got the capability in place and the model that supports that to ensure that there's an area there where not only can your teams and employees access trusted data and all the things that come with that, but have got the ability to do what they need to do. So whether that's developing a new ad hoc model of some kind, whether it's playing with sort of transformations and logic and trying something new out because they've had a scenario that happened on the ground, on the edge in their business, and they need the tools to be able to jump in and do something about it, not rely on a central capability to try and make that happen on the day. So it's about how do you foster that and make sure the teams have got that capability. But just having that isn't enough alone. You need to start to understand the usage patterns. So whilst you might have something like that in place, how do you know who's using what's actually being consumed? And therefore, how do you use that information to sort of identify opportunities to ultimately, again, come back to the top, lift that literacy? So who do you know in the organization that needs to be targeted with specific training or things to actually help lift back up that literacy and make sure that people know what's available, how to use it, and what the risks and appropriate use are amongst that. Over the race of this, we've just gone through 3 key sort of areas and a bit of content in there. I'm going to sort of try and summarize that into, I guess, some pretty key takeaways that I'm hoping that those on the call can sort of take away and maybe do something with straight away. So what do you do if you don't have governance practices in place? Where should you start? What would be your first sort of area to focus in on? I guess my recommendation here is identify the strategic outcomes and the strategic objectives that are potentially on your business plan. Look at those and understand where governance practices would help achieve those outcomes. Where would governance practices help make sure that they become a success? And it's about using those as the driver to get governance back on the plan as a priority. So as we've sort of talked about through the course of this, governance will become a key enabler in this space. And it's always a bit of a hard sell. It's always hard to get the business case up because of the traditional way of looking at this from a compliance and control perspective. So get it on the agenda around how it's actually going to enable some of those business objectives. Start simple with quality and observability techniques. So get some of these tools in place that help you sort of understand the quality of the data, make sure you know what's there and you can start to take action on some of that, because that will help build trust and gain support in some of these practices, and make sure that you've sort of got the momentum to actually start to get some of the bigger initiatives underway as well. What do you do if you don't have a strategic plan of data and AI initiatives? And probably more importantly, that you know that plan is embraced at an executive level. So this is not about having a plan that sits with the data team and they're beavering away. This is having a plan that's sort of embraced and accepted as part of the overall business objectives. First step, would recommend get a simple plan on a page. Get those initiatives identified, get them on a view, make sure it's simple to understand, but make sure that they're linked to the clear value and the business outcomes that we've sort of been talking about. There was a key quote I took away from one of the sessions at Gartner that really resonated with me. And that was, when you're talking about the space and talking about strategies, there is no data strategy. There are only business strategies that rely on data. And that's really bringing back that key point of, if you're putting forward a strategic plan in the data space of what you're trying to achieve, it should be a business plan. It's just that they're initiatives that rely on data and capabilities you're trying to get in place. It shouldn't be a plan just for the sake of doing data. And that's what this needs to come across like. Another key point here is to understand your organization's AI appetite. And by that, I mean, there's a lot of talk in the space. There's a lot of different views across potentially in your own organizations. Understand what that appetite is at different levels and across different teams and organizational units, and use that appetite and understanding to sort of anchor some of those initiatives and really make sure that sort of ties your business plan together to get started with some of those plans and initiatives that you can sort of surface. So I guess the recommendation through some of the sessions at Gartner is, don't rush off and try and bite off too much if there's certain parts of your business that just aren't going to be interested, for example. So make sure it's aimed at the right appetite. Most importantly, under this pillar, it's about get that execution plan in place, get started and learn. So make sure you've got a plan, it's iterative, you can get moving, and you're not trying to boil the ocean with a 12-month kind of view before anyone starts to see anything. So it's really about getting started and realizing that mistakes will happen. You know, there'll be learnings along the way. There'll be things that you might need to adjust. There might be AI tools and things that you develop along the way that need to be adjusted and learnt, and or potentially even shelved and moved on to something better. It's part of the learning curve. Okay, what do you do if you don't have a sort of user-focused campaign to tackle that people aspect, either in place now or planned over, say, the next 12 months? Where do you start? First recommendation is get visibility on the usage patterns, what's happening in your organization, so you actually understand who's adopting capability and who isn't. Without that visibility, you're at risk of trying to put out broad campaigns, broad sort of training material or things that you might try and do without really understanding the specific nuances of the people in your organization and who needs the most support or where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So use that visibility to then develop that user-focused training and literacy campaigns. So look to lift both data and AI understanding, but do so in a targeted manner by understanding who in the organization probably needs the most help or would benefit the most from getting an uplift. Because you may have other teams that understand things well and can get on with the job. And last but not least, obviously, as we've sort of talked about, make sure you've got the capability in place for that exploration and self-service sort of view to support the business. It's great to go out with training and try and uplift everyone's knowledge and awareness. If you haven't got the capability in place that allows them to then go forth and do something with that, it's going to fall flat pretty quick. So make sure you got the capability in place that's going to support where you're then trying to head and support the business. So you're really enabling that collective intelligence, that people aspect of this whole journey, because without that, it'll fail pretty quickly.